What if I told you that one of the most revolutionary buildings of the 20th century, a structure that shocked Paris and the architectural world when it opened, was designed by two architects in their 30s who had never built anything remotely this large or complex before, and that their winning competition entry featured a concept so radical it literally turned the traditional museum inside out, exposing all its guts, pipes, ducts, and structure on the exterior in a riot of color that made the building look more like an oil refinery or a piece of industrial machinery than a temple of high culture. Welcome back to UrbArchitect, where today we're diving deep into the story of the Centre Pompidou, affectionately known as Beaubourg by Parisians, that extraordinary cultural center in the heart of Paris designed by Renzo and Richard Rogers and completed in 1977, a building that fundamentally challenged every assumption about what a museum could or should be, that pioneered the concept of high-tech architecture, and that remains one of the most influential and visited cultural buildings in the world nearly 5 decades after it first opened its doors to a mixture of delight, horror, and absolute bewilderment. The Centre Pompidou sits in the 4th arrondissement of Paris, in the Beaubourg area between the historic Marais district and Les Halles, occupying a full city block in one of the oldest and most densely built parts of the French capital, and its location is absolutely crucial to understanding both its impact and its significance because this is not some peripheral site where experimental architecture could be safely tucked away. This is the historic heart of Paris, within walking distance of Notre Dame, the Louvre, and countless other monuments, and the decision to place such a radically modern, industrial-looking building in this context was itself a profound statement about contemporary culture's relationship with history and tradition. The building houses the Bibliothèque Publique d'Information, a massive public library, the Musée National d'Art Moderne, France's national collection of modern and contemporary art, URCAM, an institute for acoustic and musical research located underground adjacent to the main building, plus cinemas, performance spaces, shops, restaurants, and exhibition areas, making it a genuine multifunctional cultural machine rather than a single-purpose museum, and this programmatic complexity was central to the vision of President Georges Pompidou, who initiated the project and for whom the building is named, though he died before construction was completed and never saw his ambitious vision realized. Renzo, who was Italian, and Richard Rogers, who was British, were young architects when they won the international competition in 1971. Piano was 34 and Rogers was 38, and neither had the kind of established practice or built portfolio that would normally win such a prestigious commission, but what they had was a vision that was bold, clear, and completely aligned with the spirit of experimentation and cultural democratization that characterized the early 1970s, and they also had the good fortune to have their proposal championed by the competition jury, which included some of the most progressive architectural minds of the era, including Philip Johnson and Jean Prouvé, who recognized that this young team's radical concept was exactly what Paris needed to shake up its cultural institutions and create something genuinely new. Let's set the scene for the historical and cultural context in which the Pompidou Center emerged, because this building didn't appear in a vacuum. It was very much a product of its time and place, a response to specific conditions in Paris, France, and the broader architectural culture of the late 1960s and early 70s. In 1969, President Georges Pompidou, who had a genuine passion for modern art and a desire to make culture more accessible to ordinary French citizens, announced an international competition for a new cultural center that would combine art, literature, music, and design in a single facility, and this was part of a broader movement in France and across Europe toward cultural democratization, toward breaking down the elitism and exclusivity of traditional museums and making art and culture available to everyone regardless of class or education. The late 1960s and early 70s were a period of enormous social and political ferment. The May 1968 protests in Paris had challenged traditional hierarchies and institutions, and there was a widespread sense that new forms of culture required new forms of architecture, that the marble temples and grand salons of traditional museums were incompatible with the contemporary art and culture they were meant to house. Architecturally, this was the era when modernism was being questioned and various alternative directions were emerging, including the high-tech movement that would find its purest expression in the Pompidou Center, and architects were experimenting with megastructures, plug-in architecture, and other radical concepts that emphasize flexibility, transparency, and the celebration of technology and industrial processes rather than their concealment. The Archigram Group in Britain had been producing speculative projects that imagined cities and buildings as machines or organisms. Cedric Price had designed the Fun Palace, an unbuilt project for a radically flexible cultural center, and these precedents created a context where Piano and Rogers's proposal, radical as it was, could be understood and appreciated. The site itself had a complex history. It had been occupied by Les Halles, Paris's central market, which had been relocated to the suburbs, and the area had become somewhat run down. So part of the project's mission was urban regeneration, bringing new life and activity to this historic neighborhood through cultural programming and public space. Now let's talk about the design concept and what makes the Pompidou Center so architecturally revolutionary, because this building represents a fundamental reimagining of how a large public building could be organized and expressed. The core concept, which Piano and Rogers developed with their engineering collaborator UrbArchitect and partners, particularly engineer Ted Happold and structural engineer Peter Rice, was to create a building that was essentially a flexible container, a series of large, open, column-free floors that could be adapted to different uses and reconfigured as needs changed over time. And to achieve this flexibility, they decided to move everything that would normally be inside the building to the outside. The structure, the circulation systems, the mechanical systems, the electrical systems, everything that isn't programmed would be expressed on the exterior, liberating the interior for maximum flexibility and making the building's functioning completely legible and visible. This concept of turning the building inside out, of exposing rather than concealing the systems that make it work, was revolutionary and shocking at the time, and it remains one of the most distinctive characteristics of the building today. The structure consists of a series of steel trusses that span the full 48-meter width of the building, creating column-free interior spaces on each floor, and these trusses are expressed on the exterior as massive structural elements painted white, creating a powerful geometric rhythm along the long facades. The floor plates are essentially hung from these trusses using steel tension rods, creating suspended floors that cantilever beyond the structural frame, and this structural system, which is fully expressed and celebrated rather than hidden, gives the building its distinctive exoskeletal appearance, like a building stripped down to its bones and mechanisms. On the exterior, the various building systems are color-coded according to a scheme that Piano and Rogers developed to make the building's functioning legible: blue for air conditioning ducts and ventilation systems, yellow for electrical systems, green for water pipes and plumbing, red for circulation including the elevators and the famous external escalators, and white for the structural frame, creating a polychromatic composition that makes the building look like a giant diagram of its own. Systems, educational and celebratory at the same time. The most iconic element of the building is undoubtedly the external escalator that climbs diagonally up the western facade facing the piazza, enclosed in a transparent tube that provides spectacular views over Paris as you ascend. And this escalator isn't just a circulation device, it's a public attraction, a kind of vertical street that extends the public realm from the piazza up through the building, allowing visitors to experience the building's height and the urban context before even entering the galleries or library. The piazza itself, designed in collaboration with Italian landscape architect Gianfranco Franchini, is a crucial part of the project. A large sloping public space that was cleared of the dense urban fabric that had previously occupied the site, creating an open gathering place that has become one of Paris's most active and beloved public spaces, filled with street performers, tourists, students, and locals. And this piazza is where the building's mission of cultural democratization is most visible, making the approach to culture casual and accessible rather than formal and intimidating. The building's organization is relatively straightforward despite its complex appearance. The lower floors house the public library and temporary exhibition spaces. The middle floors contain the permanent collection of modern art. The upper floors house offices and the restaurant with its spectacular rooftop terrace. And UrbArchitect is located underground in a separate structure connected to the main building, with its spaces designed for acoustic experimentation, including anechoic chambers and variable acoustic spaces. Let's get technical and talk about the structural and systems innovations that made this building possible, because the Pompidou Center required some genuinely groundbreaking engineering to realize Piano and Rogers's architectural vision. The structural system, designed by Peter Rice and the UrbArchitect team, is based on those 48-meter spanning steel trusses I mentioned, And these trusses are composed of circular and square hollow steel sections that are bolted together using a sophisticated joint system that Rice developed called the gerbaret, a cast steel element that acts as a bracket cantilevering outward from the main truss to support the floor edges beyond the structural line. And this detail is not just technically elegant, but also visually distinctive, with these cast steel gerbarets looking like sculptural elements that articulate how loads are transferred from the suspended floors to the main structure. The floor plates themselves are composite steel and concrete construction, but they're designed to be demountable and reconfigurable, with raised floors that can accommodate changing electrical and data requirements, and with partition systems that can be moved to create different spatial configurations depending on exhibition needs, embodying the flexibility that was central to the design concept. The environmental systems were also innovative for their time. The building uses a double-skin façade on some elevations with the mechanical systems running in the interstitial space, and the air handling systems are oversized to provide high air change rates that are necessary for a building that sees millions of visitors annually and that houses valuable artworks requiring precise environmental control. The external escalator system was a technical challenge because these moving mechanical systems are exposed to weather, requiring special materials and maintenance protocols, and because the glass tube enclosure had to provide weather protection while remaining transparent and not creating a greenhouse effect in summer, which was solved through ventilation openings and solar shading devices integrated into the escalator tube. The color coding system I mentioned earlier isn't just whimsical or arbitrary, it's a pedagogical tool that makes the building systems comprehensible to visitors, turning the building into a kind of three-dimensional textbook about how large public buildings work. And this educational aspect was very much intentional, part of the broader mission of demystifying culture and making knowledge accessible. The external expression of structure and systems also has practical advantages. It makes maintenance and replacement much easier because you can access pipes, ducts, and equipment without having to disrupt interior spaces, and it provides inherent flexibility because systems can be modified or upgraded without major renovation, which has proven valuable over the building's nearly 50-year lifespan as technology and requirements have changed. The building's relationship with light is interesting and somewhat paradoxical. On one hand, the large open floor plates and the structural system that minimizes interior columns allow for flexible lighting design and good natural light penetration where desired, but on the other hand, the density of external systems and the need to protect artworks from direct sunlight mean that many interior spaces are artificially lit, creating gallery environments that are more controlled than transparent, which is somewhat at odds with the building's overall aesthetic of openness and transparency, but necessary for its function as an art museum. The reception of the Pompidou Centre was intensely divided when it opened in 1977 and has remained somewhat controversial throughout its history, though it's fair to say that appreciation has grown over time as people have gotten used to its radical appearance and as its influence on subsequent architecture has become clear. When the design was first unveiled in 1971, it provoked shock and outrage from many Parisians and architectural conservatives who saw it as an insult to Paris's historic urban fabric, a crude industrial intrusion into the elegant classical context of central Paris, and critics called it everything from an oil refinery to a monster to the Notre Dame of pipework. And there were serious attempts to stop the project or demand significant modifications. However, the building also had passionate defenders who recognized it as a genuine innovation, as a building that was honestly expressing the values and technologies of its time rather than hiding behind historical pastiche. And when it opened, public response was overwhelming, with far more visitors than anyone had anticipated, over 7 million in the first year alone, making it immediately one of the most visited attractions in Paris. The building won numerous awards including the Reynolds Memorial Award in 1977, and the Reba Royal Gold Medal for Rogers in 1985 and for piano in 1989, and it's been designated a historic monument by the French government, which is particularly remarkable given how controversial it was initially and how recently it was built. The Pompidou Centre's influence on subsequent architecture has been profound and multifaceted. It established high-tech architecture as a legitimate architectural movement and aesthetic, with its celebration of structure, services, and industrial materials influencing countless buildings in the 1980s and beyond, including Rogers's Lloyd's building in London, Norman Foster's Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, and many others. It demonstrated that radical contemporary architecture could coexist with historic urban contexts, and could even enhance them by providing contrast and creating new kinds of public spaces and activities. And it showed that cultural buildings could be popular, accessible, and democratic rather than exclusive and intimidating, influencing how museums and cultural centers have been designed ever since. The building also pioneered the concept of the cultural center as urban catalyst, as a building that could regenerate entire neighborhoods through the attraction of visitors and the creation of public space, a strategy that has been replicated in cities around the world, from Bilbao with its Guggenheim to countless other cities seeking to use cultural buildings as engines of economic development and urban transformation. The Pompidou has also influenced architectural education and discourse, becoming a canonical building that every architecture student studies, and that represents a particular moment and approach in architectural history. And it sparked ongoing debates about the relationship between form and function, about whether buildings should express or conceal their systems, about flexibility versus specificity in building design, and about the role of architecture in cultural democratization. Some critics have argued that the building's flexibility has never been fully utilized, that in practice the floor plates are used in relatively conventional ways with fixed galleries and library spaces, rather than being constantly reconfigured, questioning whether the structural and formal complexity required to achieve theoretical flexibility was justified by actual operational flexibility. Others have noted that the external systems, while visually striking and conceptually interesting, have created significant maintenance challenges and have required extensive renovation work over the years, with a major overhaul from 1997 to 2000 that closed parts of the building and updated many systems, raising questions about whether this approach to building design is sustainable long-term. The building has also been criticized from an environmental perspective. Exposing structure and systems to weather and having large areas of glazing creates thermal challenges, and the building's energy consumption is relatively high compared to contemporary standards, though it's worth noting that environmental sustainability wasn't a primary concern in the 1970s the way it is today, and subsequent renovations have improved the building's environmental performance. Looking at the Centre Pompidou today, nearly half a century after it opened, what's most striking is how well it has aged and how relevant it still feels. The building's industrial aesthetic and bold colors could have seemed dated or gimmicky as architectural fashions changed, but instead it retains a freshness and vitality that many buildings from its era lack, perhaps because its expression is so honest and straightforward, based on genuine structural and systems logic rather than on arbitrary styling, and perhaps because its mission of cultural accessibility and urban engagement remains as important today as it was in the 1970s. The Piazza continues to be one of Paris's most vibrant public spaces, proving that the urban design strategy was successful, and the building continues to attract millions of visitors annually, maintaining its position as one of the world's most popular museums, while also serving its local community through the library and other programs. The building has inspired fierce loyalty and affection among many Parisians who have come to see it as an essential part of their city's identity, as much a symbol of Paris as older monuments, demonstrating that controversial buildings can become beloved landmarks given enough time, and that cities benefit from architectural diversity and experimentation, rather than from trying to maintain a frozen historical character. As architects and students of architecture, we can learn enormous amounts from the Pompidou Center about the power of clear conceptual thinking, about how a strong idea rigorously executed can create buildings that are both functionally effective and culturally significant, about the possibilities and challenges of flexibility in building design, about the relationship between building systems and architectural expression, about the importance of public space and urban design in making buildings that contribute to city life, and about the courage required to pursue radical visions in the face of criticism and resistance. The building also teaches us about the collaborative nature of great architecture, showing how architects, engineers, and other consultants working together with shared vision can achieve things that no single discipline could accomplish alone. And it reminds us that architecture is always embedded in social and political contexts, that buildings make arguments about how we should live and what we should value, and that the most important buildings are often those that challenge us rather than those that simply confirm our existing preferences and assumptions. Piano and Rogers created something genuinely new with the Centre Pompidou, not just a new style or aesthetic, but a new way of thinking about what public buildings could be and how they could function in cities. And while not every aspect of their vision has proven perfectly successful, and while the building has required significant maintenance and updating over its lifetime, the core achievement remains undeniable, And the building's influence on architecture and urban culture continues to resonate around the world. If you found this deep dive into the Centre Pompidou compelling, and you want to continue exploring iconic buildings and the ideas behind them with us here at UrbArchitect, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next architectural journey. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think about the Pompidou Center. Is it a masterpiece of conceptual clarity and democratic design? Or does its industrial aesthetic and maintenance challenges suggest limitations to this approach to architecture? We love hearing diverse perspectives from our global community, and your engagement helps us create better content. Until next time, keep looking closely, keep questioning assumptions, and keep appreciating the buildings that challenge us to think differently about architecture and its possibilities, because buildings like the Centre Pompidou remind us that architecture at its best is not just about solving practical problems or creating beautiful forms,